This special meeting of the Township Council is called to order in accordance with Section 5 of the Open Public Meeting Act, Chapter 231, Public Law 1975. Be advised that adequate notice of this special meeting of the Township Council of the Township of Franklin, County of Somerset, was made by the posting on the bulletin board at the municipal complex and transmitted to the officially designated newspapers, indicating that this special meeting would take place at the Franklin Township Municipal Complex at 7 p.m. on Wednesday, August 16, 2017. In addition, a copy of this notice is and has been available to the clerk and is on file in the office of the municipal clerk. If we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty. Madam Master Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilman Chase.
Here.
Councilwoman Francois.
Here.
Mayor Kramer.
Here.
Councilman Onijaka. Councilman Prasad.
Here.
Councilwoman Robinson.
Here.
Councilwoman Sherman.
Here.
Councilman Vasanella.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Wright.
Thank you. There's no council comments tonight, but I do want to mention that this Sunday at St. Matthias at 8 o'clock at night, there will be a vigil in regards to Charlottesville. I will be attending, and I'm sure many other members of council will be there. So the main event for tonight is the presentation by Mr. Poole. He has long worked on the market analysis study, primarily for Davidson Avenue area and Market Street, and the committee has seen it and is pretty excited about it. This is the time to present to all of council. Members of we have Mr. Orsini here, Chairman of the Planning Board, Mr. Kelly here, the Chairman of the Hamilton Street Advisory Committee, and of course, Vince Dominic, I can't remember here, the head of our Economic Development Department. We are excited to see this. And if I might ask if members of council could let Mr. Poole finish his presentation, unless you have a burning question, and then we'll ask questions at the end. We're having some technical difficulties, and we should be up in just a moment. And of course, Mr. Healy is here, our planner, and who has been very involved with planning of this whole endeavor. Going to be a Prezi, Mr. Poole?
No, actually, well, it's going to be a
PowerPoint. Back to the 90s. So to fill a little time, perhaps you'd like to fill a little of the time, Ms. Sherman. You're really the spearhead at this.
Well, thank you very much.
So a lot of the credit goes to you.
Well, I do want to also acknowledge the committee and all of the members of the team who have worked very hard with Mr. Poole to make this all happen. Yourself, the mayor has been on the committee, Councilman Chase, Councilwoman Francois. We've had Mark Healy and Vince Dominic have been there. Safi Callan, our special projects manager, has been part of this whole thing. So this has been a real team effort. And of course,
as well as the manager himself.
Oh, of course. So sorry.
I had nothing to do with it.
No. Yes, he really did. He really did. He's being very modest. But it was very much a team effort. Mr. Poole brought his very unique perspectives to us and helped us to bring it together in a package that you're going to hear tonight that will be very exciting to everyone. Just a brief background. this all started when it became apparent to us that we were not unique in that we had so many empty office buildings in our area. A lot of it had to do with the changing demographics. Our millennials were not living in communities such as Franklin. They wanted to live in Jersey City. They wanted to live in Hoboken, and if they could afford it, New York City. And truly, you're young, you want to walk around, you want to not have to own a car, you want public transportation, kinds of things that this was a suburban community that all blossomed when the World War II veterans returned home and all of the subdivisions were built throughout the country, not just here. New Jersey was the king of the hill for a very long time because we had the land, we had the subdivisions, but now it is apparent that things were changing, and this council agreed to move forward innovatively and not sit back and just rest on our laurels. And we brought in Mr. Poole and started a economic development department, which is something we so really very much need. This is long-term. Don't expect overnight things, but it's extremely exciting where the future lies for this community. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Poole, it appears you're ready.
Yeah, as best I am, I apologize. I actually had a separate presentation done off of this one, but
Okay. You could have not
We would
said
never
that.
known
We would
the
have never known
difference.
the
I know.
difference.
I had to say that just to
God bless your
get that out.
honesty.
Okay, so I will go ahead and start. Good evening. My name is Todd Poole with the firm of Forward Planning. We are land use economists. We perform economic and real estate analysis for communities and developers and public agencies nationally. And we were hired just about a year ago, I think, or just shy of a year ago, to perform a community market analysis and strategic plan for Franklin Township, which we have now completed. What I'm about to show you is a kind of a high-level overview of the study, which is fairly voluminous, and I think the council members can attest. It's a very large study, complete with background information, analysis, maps, and so forth. So we have all that in a big report if you care to read it. What we have in terms of a background process and what we went through, first of all, community market analysis, you see at the bottom there. We performed a series of analyses, including socioeconomic, labor and industry trends, industry cluster analysis, real estate analysis, what we refer to as improvement to land value analyses, which is basically looking at those properties which are likely redevelopment candidates. And then we also performed financial feasibility analysis to say, if you were to redevelop some of these sites, here's probably what it would cost or how a developer might look at it. So I apologize, I'm sweating. And then finally, we performed a strategic analysis looking at the recommendations that fell out of the analysis that we performed. Actually, let me jump back for a second. Part of this involves doing qualitative analyses, which is performing interviews and surveys, which we did. And we performed interviews with real estate brokers, with certain business professionals, and we also did an online survey. I don't know how many people in the room took the survey that we submitted if you were a business owner, but we did email that out several times. Actually, it went out about 4 times for those who weren't responding. And we got a very good response rate, a little bit over 10%, which is pretty good for an online survey. Taking all that information, it really helped us kind of fill in the gaps from the socioeconomic analysis, labor, and real estate analysis that we performed. It kind of ground truthed what we saw in the numbers. We then, from there, taking those findings as well as what we identified in the community market study, performed a strategic recommendations analysis, which is basically coming up with recommendations for how the township should move forward with regard to improving the Hamilton Business Street District, which is focus area number 1, and the current corporate business district, which was focus area number 2. And we're going to tell you how that's going to change. So first, and everything that I'm running through, we actually did a more in-depth presentation, or I did a more in-depth presentation several months ago. And so for those of you who've sat through this, this is going to be familiar. For those of you who did not, this will be new and hopefully interesting. Flat population. This is to say that in this region, not just Franklin Township, but in the Central Jersey region and even in New Jersey, population growth is relatively flat or constant. Why does that matter? Is because the markets that materialize over the next 15 or 20 years are really not being built for expansion of population and households the way they were 30 years ago. This is a market that's really looking at how people are moving within it. Relatively same number of people, different age ranges, different races and ethnicities, and different educational attainment levels. So that's kind of the takeaway from that. There is a strong growth in the older population, however, and even though the population is relatively flat, that segment that is growing in that particular that population segment that's growing are those people that are within the 55 to 74-year-old age range. Why is that important to understand? People 55 and older spend a lot less on retail than they once did. They generally eat out a little bit less than folks who are younger than that. They're also nearing retirement, and in those years where they're probably looking to downsize and move to smaller housing quarters, which obviously creates greater demand for smaller housing units. So we want to understand that because that's obviously going to have impact or influence on the type of, in this case, residential development that might take place along the Hamilton Business District in particular. There is increasing growth in non-family households, and for those who are not familiar, the U.S. Census classifies households as either family or non-family or family. A family household is two or more people who are either related by birth, marriage, adoption, or some other legal construct. A non-family household could be one or more people. They tend to be smaller households, and you could have 4 or 5 people in a non-family household, all of whom are unrelated legally. What we see happening, again, not only in Franklin Township, but in this region, and certainly because you're near a university, is there's strong growth in non-family households. These households, again, they're smaller. They can be younger or older, but in this particular case, a lot of these non-family households are younger. And think of college-age students and young professionals who are just starting out. Non-family households also tend to spend a lot more of their discretionary income eating out and going to retail stores. Why is that important? Obviously, we're looking for any type of critical mass or genesis for supporting more businesses in your community. The other thing, and you've probably noticed, there are a lot more multifamily residential units that are being built in Franklin Township, and you're going to probably see more of that over the next 10 to 15 years. You will certainly see that, and you're seeing it now along the Hamilton Business District. All right, that is not by coincidence. As I mentioned, you've got a strong demand coming from these non-family households. And then finally, you've got higher than average household incomes, which comes with higher than average consumer spending. That's a good thing, even though we are not calling for much more in the way of large-scale retail. As a matter of fact, we're not calling for any large-scale retail. The retail that we are recommending would be more convenience or specialty. That would include restaurants, bakeries, certain service type of establishments, and could be a boutique retailer, clothing retailer. But you're not going to be seeing any more big box retail moving into the area. A combination of online retailing and the change in demographics has really kind of pulled the rug out from under traditional retail. Moving on, now we're talking about kind of labor and industry trends. more than a third of Franklin Township's economy is concentrated within professional services, wholesale trading, and manufacturing. The so what question. The so what is those particular industry segments happen to be relatively well paying. That's a good thing. We want to see more of that. Unfortunately, and this is principally for manufacturing, those jobs continue to erode, and that's probably not going to change no matter what the policies are at the national level or even at the state level. It's just the nature of manufacturing. It's becoming less labor intensive, more technology driven, more automated. And while manufacturing will continue to play a role locally, regionally, certainly in your corporate business park, it will not need nearly as many people to operate. Wholesale trade also is becoming automated, although not as quickly as manufacturing. And there too, it's a strong industry. You're continuing to see a lot of growth, as I will show you in a little bit. One of the areas of strongest demand for real estate in your town, and certainly over in Piscataway, is for light industrial wholesale type trade. You could probably put up 300,000 square feet of distribution warehousing tomorrow and have it leased up inside of a month. I mean, that's how much demand there is. So that continues to be a very strong point in the area. And then professional services, for those who are not familiar, that includes folks like myself who are consultants, architects, engineers, anybody who can pretty much hang a shingle out or hire a lot of people and do something that is considered technical in terms of selling their service. In this Middlesex, Somerset area, that is a very strong and continuing to grow type industry segment. And so, the so what question there is they're not necessarily looking to fill big, shiny office buildings because, as we know, you've got a lot of vacancy in your office building sector. However, these professionals do desire a combination of small office space that's out in the community or the ability to work from home, and which means that they need the zoning regulations that permit working from home to the extent that they have clients coming to their house or deliveries and that kind of thing. Growth in healthcare, that is by far among any industry sector, and I don't care just about wherever you go in the country, that is the strongest industry sector. It also happens to be today the largest industry by employment. And I don't need to tell you, you've got a lot of healthcare in this area that will continue to expand as the population ages, and as government pushes and government and industry pushes more medical service delivery out into the community. So where there is demand for office, it is medical office, and we refer to that as kind of dock in the box type space, right? So you no doubt have driven along some of your commercial corridors and seen quick MediServe or the quick emergency service type medical office businesses. Those will continue to sprout up as we go out in time, as well as more just outpatient medical facilities. Again, manufacturing is in decline. And so there's a mix of employment opportunities in the region, and as we identified, these employment opportunities require varying skill levels and levels of education. Not everybody needs to go to college and get a four-year degree to grab some of the high-paying jobs that are out there. There are plenty of manufacturing jobs that, even with a certificate from a community college or just a two-year degree and on-site training, young people can walk into a position earning $35,000 or $40,000 and quickly ramp up to $60,000, $70,000 a year. So that is something from an economic development standpoint that the township, in partnership with the county and state agencies, wants to be able to promote. Moving on to real estate, what we've identified under our supply-demand analysis, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with how this works, is when we determine how many new housing units we think can fit or can be absorbed into a particular market area, such as Franklin Township, we need to understand population trends, growth, decline, household trends, as well as existing inventory, how quickly the housing is aging, as well as pent-up demand for housing that is usually a function of how many people work in the area but don't live here. And in our analysis and in our study, and I'm not showing you this here, we were able to identify that there are quite a number of people who work in this vicinity, including in the corporate business park, who do not live anywhere or do not live within a 20-minute drive of here. We consider about 5% of those people to represent pent-up demand for housing. And that is to say, if developers were to build quality housing, at affordable rates across an income spectrum, some of those individuals would give up that commute to move locally. So based on that, we've identified, through all those factors, we have identified that in demand all the way through 2026, and under the assumption that there isn't a lot of new housing being built beyond what we know exists today, that is either under construction or being planned to be constructed, that upwards of 1,500 new units could be captured in Franklin Township. Now that's not, and again, that's by 2026. That is not to say that you're going to get 1,500 units, just to say that we believe that there could be a market for that many units based on population, household growth, and employment factors. Talked about demand for office and the reasons why. While there is really no demand for traditional corporate office space, and you only need to go out into your corporate business park to see that, you've got half-empty buildings, if not greater than, in many locations in your corporate office park. But nonetheless, where there is demand is really concentrated among medical office users, so that will continue to be the case. Demand for new retail stores, you're probably on the, on 287 and on your major thoroughfares, you're going to be able to see, or you're going to see a lot more retail closures over the next 5 years than you are going to see retail openings, unfortunately. Which brings up two issues. Number one, there are going to be a number of retail employees who are going to be losing their job and not going to be in a position to easily find another job in that same industry. But just as importantly, and for the township, from a rateable standpoint, those ratables are under attack just from the standpoint of demand is waning. There aren't a lot of businesses around to backfill that space. I say this because, and you're not unique, most communities in the state and certainly around the country need to start thinking about how they will repurpose large swaths of retail space that for decades, that's what it's been. The retail environment is changing, and as I mentioned before, say for restaurants, specialty retail, things that you can't get anywhere else, the bigger retailers, that stuff is going under. And I also say this, because recently this was just announced in a number of publications, grocery stores are also feeling the pain right now because a lot of them overbuilt, and guess what? Amazon has just stepped into their space. So yet another, another factor that may upend the retail in this area. A very strong, or what I would consider a positive factor for Franklin Township is its proximity to major arterials, not just 287, but relatively close by to the Turnpike, routes 1 and other large arterial highways. To be able to have that and be able to attract distribution warehousing, Franklin Township still is very attractive in this I-287 submarket, which is what it's referred to as. It's not going to compete with Exit 8A on the Turnpike, or certainly where the distribution warehousing center is in Edison, but it has its niche area, and really your competitor is Piscataway across the highway, across the river. So that is something to keep in mind, and again, I think zoning needs to be kept in mind when thinking about how you're going to continue to incentivize distribution warehousing operations to move into your industrial park. Now, and these maps are flipped, and that's why I obviously had changed this up. But The maps that you see on the screen, or at least the names above them, need to be flipped. We have Hamilton Street Business District and the Corporate Business District, and what I'm going to do now is just quickly, these are, and I apologize, you're not going to read all this, but when we came into this study, we were really coming into this to answer questions. And I'm not going to read all of these, but some of these are worth mentioning. And really, in part of our scope, as we presented it to the town, we had indicated that these are some of the questions that we will be answering. What currently makes the township attractive, and how can the township capitalize upon this? How can office vacancies and redevelopment be successfully managed through targeted development? How can the township capitalize on market deficiencies or regional opportunities given location and demographic considerations? What types of market opportunities are best and most realistic for key parcels? What incentives can be offered to attract businesses? So these are just some of the questions that really our study set about to answer, and obviously some of the analysis that I just went through was about doing just that. So for Hamilton Street Business District zoning updates, I mean, one of the recommendations that we have, and before I say this, I think it's important to point out that, under the stewardship of Vince and Mark and their respective offices, they've done a great job in updating your zoning regulations such that you do see net new investment along the Hamilton Business District. All right, so we're not coming in here and trying to take credit for what's already was underway and occurring. As a matter of fact, when we came in and we saw that, we thought, well, that makes our job a little bit easier because we would have recommended that if it weren't taking place. So, Mark and Vince are to be commended because they kind of saw that a few years ago, and as a result of making, getting those zoning changes made, you're now seeing the fruits of that with new private investment into mixed-use residential ground floor retail. We want to continue to see that happen. And how will that happen? It's going to happen through making sure that you've got appropriate density along the business district. We're also recommending that you change what is referred to now as the business center to the Hamilton Village Center. We want to create a more walkable district, and we want people to understand that this is a place that you can, not only live, and shop, but also work and stroll at night and hit restaurants. We've also made recommendations on kind of breaking it up, what is now a 1.3 mile linear stretch of commercial district, into 3 segments, with the center segment becoming that village center, and the outer 2 segments, which we have in our mapping in the report, as transitional zones, showing you how you're coming in and it's changing character into a business district. We want to see zoning requirements or provisions relaxed for ground floor retail. Not every development that gets built on Hamilton Street needs to have ground floor retail. All right, this is probably one of the challenges, no matter what town you go to. Everybody thinks that if you build residential in a commercial area, or at least in an area that's near a commercial area, that you need to have ground floor retail. The problem with that is that the market may not be able to support retail everywhere you place it. And the other problem with that is the more you spread it out, the weaker is your commercial district. You want to be able to concentrate it and create a critical mass. So thus we're recommending that there be a relaxation of that requirement. Same thing for parking. We are entering the age of autonomous vehicles. We are in the age of Lyft and Uber, people riding bicycles, of more people taking transit, particularly given where you're located near Rutgers University, and having transit, bus transit along those corridors. We would strongly advocate, and I know Mark and Vince agree, that parking requirements also be relaxed. That is to say that not as much parking be required as has traditionally been the case. that is also a financial incentive for developers. You know, people often think that a developer comes in with their hand out looking for hard cash or a tax abatement. And while for some that may be true, for others, being able to reduce the amount of parking that they have to provide, which is literally a drag on their financial return, is a major incentive. So is too increasing density or increasing the height bonus that a developer might achieve in developing. So these are all things that we have made recommendations in favor of, and they are in our report. And also finally, we would strongly recommend that zoning approvals be expedited, in particular where the desired goals of the township are being met or satisfied. That those who are really doing what it is that the municipality is looking to have done should really get an opportunity to go to the front of the line, because that is going to obviously improve both the fiscal and social well-being of the community. Business recruitment strategy, and this is just but one that I'm showing you for Hamilton Business District. We believe that you should be promoting current and prospective investment opportunities along the Hamilton Business District street, and in particular with both existing entrepreneurs as well as prospective entrepreneurs. And what I mean by prospective, we know there are a lot of entrepreneurs in Franklin Township, and that's just based on educational attainment and income levels. Usually those two things are strong indicators of entrepreneurial activity. I would say that being in a position to talk with people about what those opportunities are to fill storefronts, open up a new business, walk with them in the district and do this. We're recommending you do this twice annually, kind of have a invest in Hamilton Business District Day 2 times, that you would get people to lay eyes on the street maybe in a way that they hadn't before. And for those who have investment resources, to take a look at perhaps leasing a store, or even if they have development opportunities to go in there and build a new building with ground floor retail and upper floor residential. In terms of responsible parties, really this should be led by the Economic Development Director and Business Advocate, and obviously with support from the Planning Director, the Township Committee. And that's not to say that you wouldn't necessarily want to partner with the Chamber of Commerce and other business entities, but really I think the core group is right here in this township to follow through on that. And doing that does not necessarily have to cost a lot of money. What we're talking about to really just promote these opportunities, upwards of $5,000 annually to do direct mail and print media and get people to show up, and obviously invite your existing business owners to talk with folks. I mean, it's really a team effort, and I think that's kind of low-hanging fruit that could get started relatively quickly. All right, so moving on to the corporate business district area. This is for the zoning, really what we're talking about here is creating what we've recommended to be known as the Franklin Business and Technology Park. Okay, so today it's known as the Corporate Business District. We're saying it needs a better identity. It needs to be branded in a different way to connote what you have, and really based on the industry that's there, as well as the industry that could be there, and the fact that you are relatively close to Rutgers University, we believe it's appropriate to rebrand the Corporate Business District as Franklin Business and Technology Park. With that, of course, it's not just about here's a new name. We're also making a recommendation that you provide new signage, have poles with banners indicating it is the Franklin Business and Technology Park, that you've got wayfinding signage that is also coordinated and color themed and so forth. And so there's a real, once you enter that park, you're there, okay? Does that matter? It does. When you look at some of the bigger, business and research parks around the country, such as Triangle Park down in North Carolina, Triangle Research Park, they're successful in part because they've themed themselves, and people want to be associated with that. And I think that Franklin Township has that opportunity to theme what you currently have. We have plenty of examples and photographs of what that should look like. I don't have that with me on this particular presentation. In terms of incentivizing this type of investment, one of the things that we're going to recommend is that the town look at designating certain sites within your current business park as areas in need of redevelopment. You have a lot of development sites, a couple of sites where there's a half-empty office building sitting on roughly 8 to 10 acres of land, which could better be repurposed for light industrial. Could bring in not only more rateable dollars, but certainly more jobs, and provide more vibrancy, which of course the more business investment that you bring into the park, the more opportunity there is to bring in yet more business investment, because usually those businesses coming in require services and products to continue to function. We're also recommending that you create a comprehensive plan for the betterment of the business park. Right now, the business park has been operating for several decades with just some minor recommendations on the zoning to it. We think that along with rebranding it as the Franklin Business and Technology Park, that you want to create a comprehensive plan that says, here's what we want the park to look like in terms of its landscaping, in terms of providing for accessibility, bike trails, walking. I can't tell you how many times I drove through your business park, and I did so many times, and I saw people walking in the street because there are no sidewalks. And that's, if you're going to attract more corporate users, and particularly corporate users who are trying to attract millennials, you're going to need sidewalks, you're going to need safe routes in terms of bike paths and that kind of thing. That's all part of a comprehensive plan, as is having a corporate identity and making sure that things are somewhat uniform. Again, as with the Hamilton Business District, we would also make a recommendation that there be something of a relaxation on the parking. All right. Again, go out to the business park and you can see, looking at these office buildings where the zoning was done decades ago, there's just far too much parking that is underutilized, which means that there's underutilized land that could best be repurposed for new investment, new buildings. Part of the recommendation and through consultation with Mark and Vince, we're also expanding the boundaries of what is to be called the Franklin Business and Technology Park. So the map that you have on the screen actually represents a larger footprint that would take into consideration additional land area that could be redeveloped for light industrial and more corporate use. And we think that's appropriate. You've got a lot of land that would otherwise be underutilized, and you certainly have plenty of farmland, but this is land that we think could be better repurposed for corporate users. So we're calling this a business retention strategy as opposed to a recruitment, although recruitment, we're not saying that you shouldn't go out and recruit more businesses. You should. But first and foremost, and based on what we heard in our survey, you really need to have a good retention strategy. You've got a number of businesses that are considering leaving Franklin Township, and not because they think Franklin Township is bad, just that they don't think that given current zoning regulations or given their current space considerations that they can stay here any longer. Well, you won't have an opportunity to change their mind, or at least help them change their mind if you don't know about this. So this becomes a question of having an intervention before they're calling you on the phone and saying, in the next month or two, we plan on vacating this building. That's why we're recommending that, on an annual basis, if not a semi-annual basis, that you're doing surveys. On an annual basis, you're going out and you're visiting businesses and just having site visits, chatting them up. This is something that the New Jersey Economic Development Authority started doing, a couple of decades ago, and it's been very successful for them in, retaining businesses in the state of New Jersey. I think something very similar should happen here at the local level. It doesn't take a lot of money. It's time intensive, but I think it's very worthwhile to do because really what we're talking about is retaining businesses that can ultimately grow. A lot of the businesses that are looking to leave, it's not so much because they're going to downsize or go out. They're going to go and expand somewhere else if you let them. So this is about retaining them and giving them the opportunity to expand here in Franklin Township. And again, the responsible parties are going to be mostly local in town, but we would strongly recommend that you do partner with your state agencies such as the EDA or the New Jersey Redevelopment Authority. And then finally, and I like to call this kind of the big idea, and this is the big idea for your what is now your corporate business park, soon to be the Franklin Research Technology Park, is that you explore the opportunity to bring in a large multi-use indoor sports complex. And what this is, and there are several around the country, great examples. There are a few in New Jersey, although they're not really at the scale that we're talking about here. This would be probably on the order of about 150 to 200,000 square feet under roof, enclosed, multi-purpose sports facility. So think indoor soccer, think basketball courts, swimming. It could be a variety of things. But what we identified, and there are some folks locally who kind of brought this idea to our attention, and certainly the Township Act asked us to explore this further, is that this is a market that has demand in areas such as Franklin Township, New Jersey, and certainly in the Somerset, Middlesex area. And the fact that you're close to Rutgers University also creates greater demand. We also believe that siting such a facility somewhere in your corporate business park, it would also be a major shot in the arm to your hotels, right? You've got a number of lodging facilities, more to come, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around why more are coming, but you've got a number of lodging facilities that are really probably below average in terms of daily occupancy rate. And what they're really looking for, they're looking for a driver. And so such a facility is a sports complex, indoor sports complex that can host tournaments, can have year-round programming, could be such a shot in the arm. And again, I think it makes sense too that it's close to major arterials such as 287, not far away from the Turnpike, and just that it's central New Jersey. It's well located. So we're making a recommendation that the township put out a request for a proposal. This is, and let me make this clear, we are not recommending that the township own and develop such a facility. However, we are making a recommendation that the township help facilitate this and work in partnership with investors and those who operate such facilities. In the last few months, I've actually done economic impact analyses for such operators, and it kind of further opened my eyes about the kind of money that they bring in to a community and to a region. So, those clients that I did speak to are also interested in such a concept. So there's probably no shortage of interest out there from such business operators. So what we're recommending is that Franklin Township be something of a facilitator of that, where possible, provide some regulatory relief. And, this is something I think, could be accomplished in the next 2 to 3 years, given, as I said, the identified market demand. And that is a very quick overview. So I'll entertain questions.
Thank you very much. Before we start with questions, I just looked around the room, and I want to acknowledge the various organizations that are here for this meeting. In no particular order, I noticed members of Chamber of Commerce, Franklin Business Alliance, the police, and I do want to point out that Deputy Chief Grammer very much wanted to be here, but a death in the family has brought him across the country to attend a funeral. PBA, Cultural Arts, Human Relations, the Interfaith Committee, Trails Committee, member of the Planning Board, Hamilton Street Advisory, the media, and even a party chairman is here. So this is a bringing together of minds, and I appreciate you all being here. I'll open up for questions. I want to include Mr. Orsini and Mr. Kelly can certainly ask questions at the same level as council members here, and I'll just give initial deference to members who are not on the Economic Development Committee because we already got to ask our questions, though we may have more. So I'm opening up for questions from anyone up here on the dais or at the table in front of us.
I have a question. I have a statement. With this potential growth and the growth that we anticipate moving forward, that the public understands, since this is televised and is a public meeting, with that will be the governing body to understand the growth of the services that will be needed with the population growth, such as fire, police, which would include those services such as the tax office, sewage and water authority, things of that nature. So, and with that comes a cost. So just keep in mind, with the potential growth, which is a good problem to have, also comes the increased cost of running and planning for services that are needed for that growth.
Anyone else? Prasad.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just any thoughts on the indoor sports arena or any ways that we could go about it in terms of inviting investors to come in and build and be the magnet that brings in all the people and the dollars to Franklin and increases occupancy?
Yeah, thoughts are, like I said, we've spoken to indoor operators of smaller sports complexes that are interested. There are also consulting firms that this is what they do. They specialize in identifying the type of market that you would be able to attract, the size of the facility that would be supported, and the types of things that would be programmed within it. And then they would also be advising on the RFP being developed and sent out. And this would be kind of a national RFP. One of the things that you have an advantage over some of the existing sports complexes that exist around the country is just the population density that you have around here, the number of young people, because let's face it, that's going to be principally driven by younger people going to such a complex, the number of young people that you have in the region as well, and it's relatively strong still, and the fact that you are close to a Rutgers University. I just finished doing the economic impact analysis for the girls soccer tournament that takes place, I guess it takes place over Labor Day, and the head of that of the soccer association that runs that particular tournament, just one of the tournaments that they run, asked me to do the economic impact analysis on that. And just to give you an idea, over that 4-day tournament, you've got hundreds of players, their families, and coaches coming in from around the country, staying in hotels locally, spending in restaurants locally, and that's for a 4-day event. Our economic impact analysis identified an impact of $3 million for Middlesex County, okay, just over the 4-day period. There's an opportunity to expand upon that, obviously, with other sporting events coming into this local area. So, I think it's great potential that should be followed up on.
Is there anything in the zoning area? We did the mixed-use zoning in Hamilton Street, and that paid off. Is there anything you would recommend for the Davidson area?
Yes, for Davidson, and Davidson is one of those areas where you're seeing, or you've got at least one office building that's, putting somewhat crudely, sucking wind in terms of its occupancy, and yet it's sitting on a lot of land. And we talked about kind of this day of reckoning for retail. Well, the day of reckoning for office has been in play now for the past 10 plus years. That is not changing. Corporate office space, the way we knew it, especially in New Jersey, is not going to turn around. Per our study, we identified that, and when we did this several months ago, that in this market area, you've got a vacancy rate that hovers close to 20%, and it's been that way for a while. And our conversations with real estate brokers suggest that's not turning around because the demand to be here versus, let's say, close to Bridgewater, right? It's just not the same. So with that in mind, it becomes a question of, all right, what do you do? It's good for not only the town, but it's good for the holders of that real estate. And really it becomes a question of partnering and saying, look, we can, and actually the financial feasibility analysis that we performed was just that. We took one of those underutilized office properties. We showed what the taxable value is. We showed what the financial value is to the holder of the real estate. And then we said, well, what if you were to redevelop it for light industrial? And we showed what that value is to the holder as well as to the town. It's a substantial difference. And so I guess my point is to be proactive with these owners of, underutilized buildings to suggest other uses that would be more profitable to them.
Just one follow-up, and that is the retail section is, of course, declining and giving way to the online retailers. And we had, Amazon come in a big way into Monroe or that area. We missed out on that, but there are others that we can attract. And is there anything we can do to have brokers or whatever on a national basis go out and reach out and bring these people in? And of course, the need for warehousing. So the whole distribution system is in flux and change.
Right. So, in answer to your first question, the brokers are already doing that for you. They are already beating the bushes to try to find where they can place some of these tenants who want to be in this market because of the population growth, as well as along exit 8A and exit 8, you've got warehousing facilities that are upwards of 2 million square feet, which you will never have in your park, or even 1 million square feet, quite honestly. There is still strong demand for warehouse distribution space of less than 500,000 square feet to kind of delivery, right? Brings me back to my earlier point that you've got office property sitting on a large swath of land that could be better repurposed for a 400,000 square foot distribution facility that could land a big player. And I will tell you, if that were to happen tomorrow, you would have brokers swarming over this place because they can't find enough of that kind of space. And you only need to jump across the river to Piscataway to see that being realized.
Mr. Orsini, you had a question.
Thanks, Mayor. So, Todd, great presentation. I think that, first of all, I'm Mike Orsini, Chair of the Planning Board. So, in making some mental notes, if I can flip through them, so going kind of last first, the sports center idea, I think, is a great idea. We're not bereft of those type of facilities. We have DTS soccer. We have Pro-Tech hockey ponds. They're sort of niche. What you're talking about is more like a Monroe Sports Center. Yeah. And as somebody who's spent a fair amount of time and money taking my kids to soccer and basketball tournaments throughout their teen years, and still in progress, I might add, I think that's a great idea because there is a lot of critical mass there. In terms of the overall gestalt of the district that you're proposing, I think the thing that stuck out in my mind the most is, we are doing some of the things already. Before the Planning and Zoning Board have been a great number of warehouses. Data centers have been very big. They've waned in the last year or so, but secondary data centers have been repurposed into some areas. The problem with all of those uses, when you don't have a use like the sports center, like you're talking about, is there's not a lot of people that takes to staff those. There's not a lot of critical mass. Right. But in terms of having an overall district that can be responsible for the ambiance, so when I think of a science and technology park on somewhat smaller scale, I think of a place I used to work in Cranberry off of 130, where Amicus Pharmaceuticals, and there's a fair number of buildings that were built for pharmaceuticals. Unfortunately, many of those are empty. You do have a synergy with Rutgers, as you say, but they will have their own incubator facilities that are much cheaper. Now, if a company grows large enough to outgrow an incubator space, we could be well positioned to capitalize on that. But in terms of the overall management of the district, the walking trails, I mean, if you look at that facility in Cranberry and Day Road, they do have, a common cafeteria where like anybody can go to. They have walking trails. They have a fountain. They have a gazebo where people can go for lunch. I mean, that's the kind of ambiance I think you're talking about, where people are out walking on Route 130 or on Dye Road to try
Correct.
to do that. So yeah, tremendously support that. And of course for the hotels. I mean, we approve what is legal. I mean, we just got another Hampton Inn, which we all shook our heads at, but it is what it is. It's a permitted use, and they must have made some market determination that they can make it with whatever margins that they have. That being said, I mean, all of your ideas kind of feed into that, but you need some major draw. I mean, even a large warehouse of 400 or 500,000 square feet, a quarter of an Amazon that's in Robbinsville, would still not get you a lot of people. I mean, it gets you a fair amount of people, but you need something to do a little more critical mass. And if you look at some of the development that we've had on Pierce Street with those shops and restaurants, I think they're doing pretty well. You would have that. Working backwards to Hamilton Street, I think that we made tremendous progress there. There's some projects that are going to be underway that have been approved. We do struggle with the question of how much ground floor retail. That struck me, because we've had places which had ground floor retail. The obvious thing is that the tenants above support the businesses below. It doesn't always seem to happen that way. People kind of go where they go. But the demand for the kind of housing, I mean, I strongly suggest we try to take a look at what, on a scale that North Brunswick is doing with the old J&J as a transit hub. I mean, that is a place where, you have access to public transportation. Somebody can work in Jersey City or can and take public transit, as difficult as that may be these days. But in theory, you could get into New York pretty quickly. So I mean, you'd be able to do that. So one question I have is, in terms of this corporate and research business park idea, is there, like the Hamilton Street Business District Association, is there an umbrella organization that ought to be created to facilitate this, that would be crossing tenants and borders? So before you answer that question, I just want to make one more point, and this is more to council. We are doing the reexamination of the master plan this year. Mark has done a lot of work on it. We might be a little bit behind in terms of, he's wearing two hats right now, but we are doing it. This is an ideal time to incorporate these ideas into the master plan, to the extent that they can be. And of course, it's a living document. It doesn't mean every 5 or 10 years is the only time you can update the master plan. Obviously, you can do it anytime you want. We've seen that with affordable housing, how often we can amend the master plan. But the point is, now's a great time to kind of memorialize some of these ideas. And one last thing, in terms of parking, when you consider parking ordinances, the planning board takes a great care to try to minimize parking. Bank spaces, reduce impervious coverage, utilize the land for the most, bang for your buck, and not have huge unused expanses of parking which are not attractive or useful. I would caution, like council in general, of amending parking ordinance to be so strict that there isn't that flexibility to downsize, because we always look to do less if possible. We do have a fairly, Mark can comment more on this, overzealous amount of parking that the ordinance typically requires, but there's hardly an application that goes by where we don't grant variance for parking and less parking. So I'll go back to my question about an overarching umbrella organization that can sort of facilitate this plan the way Hamilton Street Business District has on theirs. And thank you.
Right. Thank you for the comments. So the straightforward answer is yes, yes, yes. You need a organization to help coordinate oversee and advocate for your businesses. You need that as much as Hamilton Street needs it, and perhaps more. Think about it this way: where's your biggest rateable in terms of an area in this town? If tomorrow the ground swallowed up an area and it happened to be your corporate business park, fiscally, you'd be up the creek without a paddle. That alone should tell you you need some type of advocacy group that comes together. It could be formal or informal, but certainly get it started, that becomes a sounding board for the governing body. They become, kind of the folks who alert you to, hey, XYZ firm may be thinking about getting out of town. You might want to go visit them. Or, hey, we've got some good ideas for, making improvements in the park, infrastructure-wise, or whatever the case may be. A couple of other things I forgot to point out. They are in the study, but I wanted to make mention here. One of the recommendations we are making for your business park is that you allow for some showrooming, all right? And many moons ago, when I worked in the public sector and I oversaw the Lakewood Industrial Business Park, I helped bring in Blinds to Go, the manufacturer of blinds. And part of that deal was, and they got it approved by the town, is they were able to retail using 10% of their building space to retail right out of where they manufactured the blinds. We think this is also a good idea for your business park, is to have, you've got a number of businesses that make stuff and they don't sell it there, but it would be kind of neat to have them, have a small showroom space, and have it sold there, and you bring some people in, and just, I think it's, it's beneficial. It shows goodwill from the town, and I think it just works well synergy-wise. The other thing that we're recommending is that in the not-too-distant future, that you explore the opportunity to create a jitney service that does a circulation in the business park, brings you over to Hamilton Business District, as well as, by the way, the restaurants on Pierce, and then ultimately takes you to the train station. So there's like 3 or 4 major stops, right? And the service runs hourly or something like that. Okay, it could be a deal where, again, if you had this kind of advocacy group that's in the park, that you bring together, the business owners and operators, and they say, we'll kick in for that because our employees want that. And I will also tell you that is a marketing strategy that can be leveraged to bring in companies that have younger workers who don't want to have anything to do with the car, to the extent they don't. We've also made a recommendation, and we talked extensively about this with Vince and Mark, and I'm grateful that they definitely encouraged me to go with this, is that you've got some locations where you've got zip car rental or leasing spots. We're heading into that era, and I think your business park needs to position itself, in that forward manner, right? Be prepared for that. So different types of modes of transportation. So those are things I wanted to mention. But yes, to your question about do you or should you have some type of council, absolutely.
Mr. Chase? Sure.
I have a number of questions, although most of them are really, perhaps smaller details than we've been talking about. But one thing I keep wondering is, have you talked with the owners of these office buildings? Are they looking to do something different? Perhaps if the zoning were permitted, are they ready to tear down an office building and put in a light manufacturing or warehouse? Are they thinking that far ahead?
Councilman, the problem is this. It's an economic problem that hopefully one day will be resolved through economics. It is for what it costs them to build that building, outfit it, and what they're paying now in taxes and so forth, versus what somebody who runs or will build a distribution warehousing facility would pay and what they can achieve in rents. Those two things don't match up well, right? So I guess my point is the rents that a owner of a warehouse or distribution center could get are insufficient for them to turn around and pay the person that owns that office building what they want to get out of the deal. That gap is narrowing, I can tell you that, but they're not quite there yet. Thus is the reason you're seeing these buildings still stand there. Because I will tell you, if that gap weren't as large as it is, those buildings would start to come down, and because the owners of those buildings would do it themselves. They would redevelop it, but they're stuck. And at some point, they're going to be unstuck because it's going to be financially untenable for them just to sit on an empty property. But for right now, they're all waiting, thinking they're going to be the ones that are going to fill the building. You know, they're gambling.
As I just wonder what could the buildings be repurposed for if they're not to be torn down and replaced by something else?
Well, I'll give you, if we talk about Atrium Drive. Okay, now
Yes.
Now Atrium Drive is a little bit different. It's got that nice corporate feel with the rolling, green hills and the fountains and all that. Now, you've got some underutilized office space there. One of the things that we could see happen there, and we had some concurrence when we talked to some brokers, is that you could fill some of that office building with an assisted living facility. And an assisted living facility wants to be in a location that is relatively, I don't say isolated, but off the beaten path a little bit, which is different from where an independent living facility wants to be. They want to be more, where the action is. An assisted living facility wants more of a corporate feel, but not so high end that the patients can't afford it. And I think that those buildings that are there could probably be adaptively reused for that type of use. The other use is possible, and we heard this time and time again from the brokers that we interviewed, is apparently there are a lot of companies that are sending people from abroad, and particularly from India, into the business park to be trained to do technology stuff or sales or whatever they're being trained to do. And during that period, and that period is 6 months to a year, they're having a hard time finding kind of an extended, term place in which to live. And I guess the hotels aren't cutting it for them. In other words, no one wants to be cooped up in a hotel room for 6 months to a year. And so one of the things that we did hear loud and clear is that perhaps, one of these office buildings could be turned or could be permitted to allow for, after it was adaptively reused, to be kind of a, not a permanent, but a almost like an extended stay type facility for people who are coming in, training, and it might even be advertised as that, not as a traditional, extended stay product, but something that is specific to people that work in the office park. So those are two things that come to mind about how to repurpose those buildings. The other buildings, as the one that I mentioned on Davidson and Pierce, that one, you're going to be waiting for that one to come down.
Now, one of the thoughts I have, having noticed one of those atrium buildings seems, judging by the parking, seems to be entirely empty, and there's even more parking across from it next to the one piece of vacant land there. And really that existing parking could be used with the development of the vacant land there. That's, to me, is the one good place for an indoor sports complex, particularly if they can use that existing parking.
I would agree with that.
So before I forget, Mr. Vasanella is next, but Mr. Poole, if you could submit your PowerPoint to Anne Marie so that she can put it up on the website. It's now public domain. And if anyone wants to see which buildings are full or empty, just go to Google Satellite, and those are usually taken in the middle of the day. I did a survey once, and you'll see empty parking lots. Mr. Vasanella.
Thank you, Mayor. So, a few different thoughts. First of all, that Jitney plan you talked about, Councilman Prasad and I were on the committee, it was probably close to 10 years ago. We actually developed pretty much exactly what you just described.
I read it. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, and at the time, I was going to say you're welcome to, because quite honestly, it except for maybe, I mean, it pretty much focused on connecting that area of town, the middle of town, with the Hamilton district and the train stations, and we'd love to share it with you. But At the time, and that course was probably 8 to 10 years ago, it was, after collecting a very modest fee or $1 or $2, it was going to be about somewhere around a $200,000 a year price tag. And at the time, it wasn't considered a priority, or that we would have to subsidize it. But between the town and the approach you were saying, maybe we can dust that plan off and literally sit down with you and review. We had professionals from Rutgers Transportation School or whatever it was there.
Marty Robbins and
Voorhees,
Voorhees
yeah, worked with
Transportations,
us for 6 or 8 months. So seriously, it may be of help. Anyway, that in mind, even if that was put into play, you mentioned the possible retail component attached to manufacturing. I think that's very innovative. And the sports center, which I know was already mentioned, but we have some serious sports complexes here, and obviously a YMCA in the hopeful planning stages soon. So I see that more as scattered pieces handling separate entities, but if you can get a giant one to come in and be more of a blanket, that's great. But whether it's that or the retail component and manufacturing, my concern is traffic. I haven't heard you talk about that really. And really for that area, even if you get people to ride bicycles, even if you get people to take a jitney, you're still talking about the goal is to have monumental increase in activity, which will bring some kind of increase in traffic. And already anybody who lives here knows that at least certain times of the day, week, and year, it can be horrible. So I'd like to see and hear more about that as part of any discussion or any planning that happens going forward. And perhaps the jitney and some of the other ideas you were talking about could all be rolled into that.
Sure.
But have a component, I went through the whole report. I don't know if it had too much. But anyway, just can't stress that enough. Hamilton Street, I could appreciate the parking restriction concern and loosening up and whatnot. My concern is that the residents are really considered strongly, and they weren't talked about too much. And I understand this is a limited plan and a limited presentation, but not only how they fit into this and should be considered in the businesses and whether you have retail or not, trying to bring together the existing businesses that may be in buildings that are being torn down for this revitalization. But especially along with the parking, because what we may not see is a need for someone with a $1,800 a month one-bedroom apartment, which I don't know, somewhere along the lines, I think that's where we're headed on Hamilton Street. Maybe my price is a little bit off, but I know it's very ambitious.
You're almost there now.
Okay, so, but my concern is people who live there are residents now. Welcome to new residents, and we want to cater to the developers in a way that can make that happen. But I would like to see and hear more of the conversation always include parking and other ways that the quality of life will be maintained, especially in the Hamilton area, which I'm most familiar with. So really, it's traffic on that end, the people and their needs as it relates to parking and whatnot on that end. Otherwise, and those aren't complaints, just things I'd like to see and hear more of. The other thing I was going to mention is, business technology, all these catch terms, and I understand they're needed and can help market it, but scattered about in that whole area is a lot of medical services, whether it's administrative or clinical. Why aren't we the health and technology business park? Everything, I don't want to name businesses, but whether they're small, whether they're large practices, whether they're administrative, executive offices, et cetera, especially where we have so many in the Veronica and other areas of town, but why can't that attract, or was that considered in the branding and the rollout of initiatives?
So that type of co-location and concentration happens organically as opposed to you forcing it to happen or trying to make that happen. In other words, yes, you do have a number of medical type medical type businesses, whether they be manufacturers or service businesses that are scattered out in that area. But in terms of branding it that way, you don't want. I guess my point is you don't want to be too narrow. You want to be broad enough where yes, you're going to attract them as well as others, But because of where you compete in this marketplace, and particularly, near Rutgers University, you're not that far away from the Bridgewater market. I think you want to be a little bit more flexible, as opposed to saying we're going to go strictly after this, because you don't have anything specific to offer strictly for medical, office or medical technology folks. Nothing that would, let's say, separate you from some of the other clusters of where that's located as well. So, nothing that I came across, at least.
That's fine. Anyway, but, so again, in the future, just if you can consider, or later after he's gone, if you have it, with their questions, if you have any more commentary on the transportation, the other aspects I mentioned. Sure. But by all means, talk about it, but I know we want to get the public in now. But anyway, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Councilwoman Kimberly Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When we talked in our Economic Development Committee, that concept that Mr. Orsini brought up about having an advisory group over the business technology area, I think is a really good one, because we have a proven track record based on the Hamilton Street Advisory Group that does work, because we did that in the Hamilton Street area.
Right.
So because of your expertise, do you have some best practices that you could recommend us to try to somewhat formulate something like that for our business area?
I think it's going to be pretty easy. As a matter of fact, I think if you put the word out, and I would even strongly recommend that you get something going maybe in October, so you got a little time to work on it. You put together a letter inviting either the operator of the business or or owner of the business to show up at, maybe even here, and it's exclusively for them. And the first discussion is about establishing such a committee or a group, advisory group. I think you're going to get overwhelming participation, because they're going to understand that as their opportunity to voice your concerns and whatever else they want to voice, but also, maybe establish good relations with folks they've never met before, and vice versa. So I think you can get it created, and there's no magic formula. It's literally, let's talk about, how we want to constitute such a group. I think you want to keep it loose. You do not want it formalized, because as soon as you formalize it, politics starts to enter. Okay. I think you want to keep it very informal, but meet, quarterly. No monthly stuff. Meet quarterly, and it's more about, hey, what do you hear? What's going on? Are there things we need to know about? And with those meetings, you want to have, folks like Vince and Mark in the room, and anybody else. As a matter of fact, chamber representatives and others. I would even say, police representation, because they have interaction and interface with folks out in the park too. They need to hear what's happening out there, and vice versa. So I think it's an opportunity to bring together key representatives of the township with key representatives of the business park. And with that, I think you're going to be made aware of things you can do that we never even thought of, that makes improvements and keeps businesses here, because now they've got that relationship.
Thank you. Good idea.
Councilwoman Sherman, it's your fault we're here,
Well, I take that with great honor.
as you should. Do you have any comments?
We've heard a lot of this before. It's just really a matter, in my view, of putting together the timeframes for the next steps. I think we've talked about it a number of times with Vince and Mark and Todd, sort of helping move us forward. I think we need to get our business organizations involved in this process. We need to move on that sports complex. I think that's probably one of the fastest that would have a lot of benefits, in my opinion. And pick our priorities and just let's move. Let's get started, because there's lots of good stuff coming.
Great. So for my comments, my first comment unfortunately gets into the weeds a little bit, but just a thought maybe for Mr. Healy and Mr. Orsini. Is there any way we can encourage in the Hamilton Street on the first floor to make the interior walls non-load bearing, so that one could reconfigure if it goes from residential to retail? You don't, well, okay, if you have a comment on that. Sure. Sure.
We can look at that. I'm sure all the architecture is already incorporating, so they can, one day it's going to be a 2,000 square foot space. The next year it's going to be chopped up into two 1,000. That's usually how retail spaces are made. They
Great.
can be moved and.
And then just to be clear, I should probably, don't put down the mic. Area in need of redevelopment and redevelopment area, those are two different things? And my question centers around eminent domain.
Area in need of redevelopment, area are the same term. There's another term called area in need of rehabilitation. And in area in need of rehabilitation, there's no eminent domain involved.
Okay, so
It's a similar but different, very different.
can you give pilots in areas in need of rehabilitation?
You can give tax abatements, I think it's 5-year.
But you cannot give a pilot.
And what you were trying to lean towards was a pilot plan, or was that what you were suggesting?
Well, that's one of the reasons to do it. And let me say this, Mayor, is that, and I've worked on a number of area in need of redevelopment projects. While it is true under that statute, it does afford the ability to impose eminent domain. Most municipalities don't even go there for the obvious reasons. It happens to be attached to that particular statute, but the reason it is attractive is because it does allow you to provide for a structured pilot that is beneficial to the developer of the property as well as beneficial to the municipality insofar as but for that redevelopment or for the pilot, the project might not happen.
Yeah, and actually, there's been a relatively recent change in the redevelopment law that if you choose to go that route, you have to, at the very beginning of the planning process and redevelopment, at this point, identify right at the beginning if it's going to be a redevelopment area involving eminent domain or not. So you have to make that decision even before you start that initial study.
Okay, great. And then the last thing, Mr. Poole, you were, with the sports complex we had discussed in the Economic Development Committee, the concept of the town doing a market study so that we can use the results of that study and the fact that the study is done to attract investors. Is that
Correct.
what you're talking
Yes.
about?
Yeah, so there are 2 or 3 national firms that they focus on this. They focus on doing market studies for sports complexes that are usually either municipally operated or they're favored by municipalities, and they determine 1, do you have a market for it? 2, how big of a market is it? How big of a facility could it support? And what are the types of sporting activities that would take place there, including identifying the types of tournaments and everything else. And the reason that I think that's important, and I think your hotel group would be very much in favor, is because they're going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of it. If you put a large sports facility, indoor sports facility, and I do understand that there's the hockey rink, and I think that could be all kind of woven into it as a partnership, but I think if you had under roof 150,000 square feet of indoor soccer and lacrosse and whatever else they do there, the tournaments that get scheduled, you can have year-round bookings for your hotels. And, like I said, I think that would be a shot in the arm for the lodging industry locally.
Great. Any other comments, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Wright?
Hi, Tim Kelly from the Hamilton Street Board. First, I want to thank you for your presentation. I agree with everything you say. With the parking on Hamilton Street, what would you say? We do that like on a case-by-case basis, or is it possible like to do an ordinance that already sets a number up? This might even be for you, Mike. Just so developers know what they're getting into beforehand, because our competition is New Brunswick, right down the street, and New Brunswick has approved a 9-story building, 156 units with 50 parking spots. Most of them 1 and 2 bedrooms. They've also done a 12-story one. I think it was 190 units, graduate housing on College Ave and Hamilton Street with 0 parking. And they're presently doing another project a little further up towards our end of Hamilton Street, which again will be like 50 units with 20 parking spots. So that's kind of what we're going to be competing with on Hamilton Street.
Sounds like we should put parking meters on Hamilton Street.
Yeah.
That was a joke. That was a joke.
You know, to answer Mr. Kelly's question, this came up before, I think, at one of the applications on Hamilton is the reason New Brunswick can do that is because they have municipal lots. That's what the township needs in Hamilton Street is a municipal lot. And then your jitney can go there. And, you know, you'll have a lot of off-street parking, and, you know, if you have a walkable community, then you don't need to have associated parking anymore.
Into the mic, Mr. Kelly, please, so TV land can hear it.
On that end of New Brunswick, they don't have any municipal lots, just mainly because it's student housing, which doesn't require as much parking, you know, but I'm just, you know, that's who we're competing with. And, you know, when we come in and we have 160 parking spots, 170 parking spots for 80-unit building, I mean, that's what our competition is right down the street, where they require half of that. Now, I know that they haven't really started this maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when they first started building these buildings, and there has not really been an increase in parking. It's actually gotten a lot better. But, you know, do you have any experience in the in a longer window of these lax parking requirements? I mean, do they stay where they don't really need the parking, or, you know, a couple years down the road, a different group of people are now living in these buildings, and they all have a car, or they all want a car, and then we have a parking problem?
The owner's part is if the developer has to build structured parking, that's when kind of all bets are off. To the extent that the parking that you're requiring is at least surface lot, they could probably tolerate maybe you know, parking that they feel is excessive, knowing that, you know, once they can demonstrate that they've got too many spots, they can turn around and seek relief and then redevelop underutilized surface area, right? It's when they have no choice but to build structured parking because there is no land on which to build, and then the economics don't work. I would say this, that, and I did, you know, Mark and Vince and I spoke about this. I mean, I think if you come in around, you know, 1.5 to no more than 1.75 spaces per unit in today's market, that's probably fine because you're far enough away from the train station and all that New Brunswick offers. Now, as I mentioned, we're getting into this world where people won't need they won't need cars as much. Not they won't need cars, but they won't need them nearly as much. You know, one of the things that you might want to do is if a developer says, I really don't want to have to build that much parking, you might want to say, well, I tell you what, demonstrate that you're going to have, you know, 4 or 5 zip cars on site. You know, do things like that, you know, have, bike accessibility. I mean, there's a whole bunch of ways that you can make an argument for mitigating the amount of parking, and they're a lot less expensive, and developers will probably jump at that opportunity.
Thank you.
Seeing nothing else.
Mr. Mayor, I just have a few things that I need to cover here.
Yes, sir.
The business part of all of this. One, I heard a number of questions and comments tonight, Todd, about the future. And I don't mean the future of development in Franklin, but your future here. And what I might remind everyone is that Mr. Poole's contract kind of ends tonight, and we in the Economic Development Committee have discussed on a number of occasions the need for this to continue, and we've had this discussion with Mr. Poole about the possibility of a professional services contract, kind of like on retainer for him to address those needs as they arise as we move forward with these different projects, so I just bring that up, and so all of you who talked about things like where does this go with transportation and traffic and parking and zoning ordinance recommendations and things like that, you know, it certainly would behoove us to have a professional under contract as we move forward to do that. So I just want to put your mind at ease that while his contract more or less ends today when he provides his last deliverable to us, we have discussed that in the Economic Development Committee as how we move forward. Another thing that was not discussed tonight, Todd, and I'll just ask you to briefly touch on it, is we talked about the rebranding of Hamilton Street in our corporate business zone, and the fact that that needs to be done in a professional manner. And not to say that we're not professional, but we certainly don't have the requisite experience to brand a municipality's corporate business zone or downtown district, for lack of a better term, with Hamilton Street. And you made some recommendations. Can you just touch on what we discussed in the committee on that, and as far as that's concerned?
Sure. Again, and this is outside of my bailiwick, but you'd want to bring in someone who has done branding, and particularly branding for municipalities, that has an understanding of how that works, and more specifically branding for business districts, because it's not about, here's a color choice and here's a banner, and it's more than that. Having gone through branding for my company, it made me understand how that works. It's about what is your identity, and how do you get to that identity, and why is it your identity? And having said that, and this is probably as important as anything else to hold your advisory meeting with your business folks in October, is that should be on the table right then and there, is to even get their interest to say, would you like to participate, a group of you, not all of you, but a group of you, to participate in helping us flesh out what that brand is. I mean, what better way to get their attention and goodwill to say, we're not going to force feed you the brand. You guys are, who make the park. You help us, do this together. So, yes, you would need to, and I could certainly, help think this through, but you need to identify a brand consultant to bring in, and at that point, it's having them sit down with you, having them sit down with business owners in the operators in the corporate park, and then work through what is this brand that ultimately then turns into logos, signage, marketing. I mean, once that's done, whoever's going to be in charge of marketing empty spaces, including the brokers, by the way, they're going to want to have that. The broker, once you do this, you're going to be providing that collateral material to anybody who's marketing the park, not just staff in-house, but, real estate folks who are trying to sell your product.
So the organization at this point that has been working on this project is essentially the Economic Development Committee. And it is our responsibility at this point to put together the plan that will, working with our team, the people working for the township, as well as the council members who are on the committee, to start immediately, to put pen to paper, to come up with a plan that we can start moving ahead. We certainly need to look into, you mentioned the consultant for the sports complex, you mentioned the branding consultant, you mentioned a meeting with our businesses in the community. These are things which are kind of blurted out before we can be moving on, and that plan has to come from the Economic Development Committee and to move that forward. So my suggestion is we schedule a meeting. We're hopefully in the next few weeks, because to bring all those things together, for instance, the business in October, that's something we need to start putting together, and we have to talk about the costs for all of this and make the council aware that these things have to go in the budget. So there's realities, and now we're to the point where we have to make some decisions and move forward. And I think part of that is
the first decision that we need, that I think that council needs to make tonight is, you've all had an opportunity to see this plan. Now you've all heard our consultant give you an overview of this plan. It's very comprehensive. It looks forward to the next 20, 25 years. And I think that, much like you did several years ago with the recreation needs assessment, I think that if council will endorse this plan tonight, staff and in particular our economic development director can begin to move forward on its implementation, as Councilwoman Sherman suggested.
So this is a special meeting. I would prefer that we, at our next meeting, we put that on the agenda as a resolution. Also, I wouldn't want to adopt anything until we have our public comment. But
we certainly need to do that. Are we doing that tonight?
We're having public comment tonight.
Yeah, okay.
But I think that's a great suggestion, and I would be in favor of it, but I would prefer council a lot of council just saw this tonight, so if it could be a resolution for the next meeting, we could do that, and perhaps even a retainer for Mr. Poole would be an appropriate thing at that time as well. That's just my feeling. Any council member can jump in and disagree with me, of course.
Mayor?
They often do.
Mayor?
Yes.
No, I'm agreeing with you. No, just whether it's, how and what way you'll be involved with us ongoing, whether it's some council people might prefer their comments are part of the official record of whatever we adopt. All these things, the forming that committee you were talking about for the Davidson Avenue area. I think we need to get out of the gate right away, but I think I can speak for myself, would like to hear from the public, think about what direction we want to go in, get some ideas about how much we're willing to invest, and then the first or second meeting of September, do exactly what you were asking, formal adopting or retainer or whatever. So I definitely would prefer to move forward, but wait until September.
Okay. Right, the next item is opening to the public. I would like to acknowledge that the Sewage Authority representative is here as well, and I missed that. So do we have a motion to open to the public?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. We're open to the public. Mr. Poole, perhaps if you could have a seat here and you could avail yourself of a mic here so the public can come up to the podium and you could answer questions if they are directed towards you. Any member of the public wishing to speak, please come up, state your name and address. We'll give you 5 minutes, and no yielding of time, may only come up once. Guy.
So I'll break the ice. Benjamin Guy, 35 Patton Drive. So there's 2 sections that I actually want to talk to. One is the Hamilton Street access. There's 2 things I know that we're in progress of doing the developments on Hamilton Street, but because of the nature of what New Brunswick is actually doing, it's going to hamper some of the stuff that's actually going to happen on that street because of them. You can't compete. You can't compete with big business over there. You got Johnson Johnson and everybody else that's actually forcing a lot of hands over there. So the question to the council and planning board and everybody else on the zoning board is that do you actually look at reclassifying that Hamilton Street area so that you can actually compete for that to actually prosper the way it needs to be done? And they're bringing up the points about parking. That's one of the things that the developers have been going back and forth with for at least about 18 months now. At least about 18 months. I even heard it in a planning board meeting where one of the person just didn't understand what was going on with the parking. One of the people on the planning board just didn't understand what was going on with the parking. So that delays for you actually do research when developers got to break ground in maybe 3-4 months. That developer's eating up about $20,000 a month and actually sitting on holding costs for that, and, as far as what they're doing with their units at all. So you guys, as far as what we're looking at, we might have to look a little bit faster in the area because, again, you can't do, you're not going to be able to compete with 9-story buildings. They're almost putting up a wall over there on Hamilton Street to actually let those people come down. That's what New Brunswick's actually doing. And with them actually dropping a subplot with Devco downtown New Brunswick on George Street, which is about to have another high-rise down there, the developers that are actually planning for that traffic to come up, saying you're not going to be able to compete because you're in an old school mentality of what you're actually looking at from big business. So my question is that something that you actually want to look at for a Main Street reclassification area so that they can actually compete for big business on the area, because that is your downtown district. Whether or not you like it or not, that's how you classify from the state. That's how you classify your downtown district to be. So you might have to look at special ordinance or variances over there to actually work on better development. I know you increased the zoning ordinance to actually let them build up, but there's got to be a lot more there's got to be a lot more you got to look at as a whole over in that area to actually push big business, because the younger crowd that you're actually trying to recruit to actually work over in that area, they need more. They need something that's going to be lights, camera, action that's going to actually attract them to want to come down that area. And if it's not over in that area, just buildings is not going to do it enough. It's going to have to be something more that's going to be over there. So that is one point. The second point about about Davidson Avenue, I think I had this brief conversation with Mr. Von Locker purposely. I don't understand, and maybe you guys have already had this conversation with most of the people over in that area, whether or not it's the convention center or anybody else that's there, and if I'm offending the guy that's in the room for the convention center, I just don't understand the plan that's actually going on Davidson Avenue as a whole, from the business people and everybody else that's there. I don't know who talks to them on a regular basis. They all know that it's a dying area at all. So from a developmental standpoint, if you're not having all those people in the room on a regular basis to actually talk about business and actually talk about trade, what they can and cannot do, it's kind of hard for you to actually move a project going forward at all. We can speculate all we want as far as what we need to do in that area, but if those people are not on a monthly basis being talked to, it's not going to happen. It doesn't make a difference what we do because this is about a business transaction. The same thing is going on in Piscataway with their mayor and stuff. He's engaged with that. He's actually talking to them. He's actually talking about trade and actually how he can do more with the port system over in Elizabeth. So I just asked the question: are we doing the same thing as a whole? So that's my minor comments. Thank you.
Rosie.
Mr. Mayor, are we commenting now, or are we waiting for all questions? I'm just asking.
As you wish.
We're in public discussion. We should wait till it's
I'm
finished.
just asking. Okay.
Good evening, Alex Carrazzi, 14 Margaret Drive. Thank you very much for a beautiful presentation and great work by the team. Just a thought I had is that at least I didn't see any mention of some activities to address the needs of mothers or parents with small children. I've seen in a lot of places that in any commercial area, they have things like choo-choo train and others that attracts mothers and with small children. They come and spend the money, of course, because they're the one at home, and during the day they come. And I didn't see anything like that, and I was wondering whether or not we can add something like that. And I've seen in many small towns, and they attract a lot of people from surrounding areas as well. And of course, it attracts the businesses. So that was one thought that I had, that perhaps you can look at, or a team can look at it. Mr. Mayor, is this comments only related to this, or I can make an announcement as well?
The law states that you can speak about anything related to government.
Okay. All right. So just personal announcement I wanted to make is that this Sunday at 8 o'clock, we're going to have a vigil at St. Matthias, and the vigil is going to be from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. It is to reject any kind of racism, hate, bigotry, and reaffirm solidarity and unity. We are hoping that the members of our township as well as the official will come there. We have great speakers, as well as speakers will be from clergy to the township officers, and we hope to see all the community members, the families at San Matthias. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Good evening, everyone. Juanita Painson, 28 Barron Way. And I also speak on behalf of the Franklin Township Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for your presentation. I think it covered a lot of things that I've been sharing with others in the past. However, you mentioned that the increase of medical office space, and I think that that also promotes the need for employment, need for training centers, and I think we need to include that. And I had asked the City Council to consider speaking about a training center, an employment training center, job readiness for those who don't want to go to college, or maybe just go to tech school but have somewhere else to do. That would help because it'll translate. Additionally, I agree with Dr. Carrazzi because we have been looking as a chamber to do certain family events in cases like Easter or around the Christmas, to have, something where the kids could come and take pictures and so, because right now they're going out of town to do those things, and it would be nice if there was something in that nature where they can come and socialize, but yet not have to travel too far to do it. So if in the plan, one of the locations can have something like that. I agree with the development of restaurants and for the limited services and so forth. However, I know that because of our population, there's the liquor license is limited. So there are some places, the restaurants, and those that I have spoken to, restaurant owners who don't have liquor license, they suffer. And so I think that's something we need to take into consideration. I know there are regulations, but we have to take that into consideration, what permits we allow. I know we have spoken, Vince and I, recently about incentives to attract businesses in the business districts that you've identified. And at the moment, there are none, so I really would like to encourage the council to put something in the budget or seek funding through economic development, the state of New Jersey, or choose New Jersey, and so forth, to see what can be done to create incentives to create that corporate density that we're looking for. The sports complex would be awesome because I keep talking about being next to Big Ten school and the effects it has, in addition to where we are, and we're central New Jersey, so there would be a need to have kids. I know PDA does a lot and the others around, and it would be better for us to have something like that. One of the places that I like that I think we probably can look at is Bell Labs in Homedale, that was a big corporate center that now is pretty much a corporate incubator with different things, including a commercial kitchen, and then you have tech, so they have all kinds of things going on in that building, and space, training space, meeting space, so we can look at one of the buildings here locally for that. And I was not sure if I missed it, but I didn't see anything covering the Kingston area or the Route 27 corridor, and I wanted to know why, because that's still part of the town, and they seem separate, so.
That was never a focus of this study. This was identified before the contract was awarded to Mr. Poole's firm, that the focus areas would be Hamilton Street and the corporate business zone surrounding Davidson Avenue. It was not to include any other portions of the town.
Okay, so yes, that's what
And the
report
reason
shows that, so I was wondering why.
The reason was because there's very little as far as economic development in areas that are already built out. There's nothing that really can be repurposed or redone in those areas that are already developed. The need in this particular town is Hamilton Street and Davidson Avenue. It's been identified in
short,
a number of different.
In short, it was bang for the buck. The Hamilton Street area is an area waiting to thrive, and the Davidson Street area is an area that's failing.
I agree, but so what I would like to know is if somewhere in this report we can say that that's why it wasn't done, so you don't have that question come up
This
again.
report was not charged with that responsibility, so it won't say it in this report. This consultant was charged with coming up with a strategic plan for the corporate business zone and Hamilton Street. So there's no reference to other areas of the town because that's not what its focus was.
Right, it's not for Mr. Poole to say why he
No.
was told to do.
Okay. So in closing, because I got a response in the middle of my time, in closing, I do agree with the jitney because I participated in the Somerset County talking about transportation with New Jersey Transit, so I'd welcome that in the town.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenthal.
Hi, Gary Rosenthal, 4306 Avery Court. I'm also chairman of the Human Relations Commission. I'm not sure if this was done afterwards, but we've, in the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about a new youth center, and I just wanted to find out if we've coordinated all this at all with the
youth center and economic development are really not crossing over here.
Different things? Okay, thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Mayor, seeing no one else coming forward from the public, I'll motion to close the public portion of the meeting.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded, all in favor of closing public portion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion is carried, public portion is closed. Does council have any additional comments before we adjourn the meeting? Seeing none, motion to adjourn?
What?
What?
I would just like to
Oh,
get
right.
the questions, or and I guess when we get the meeting, the minutes, to be able to give some answers to those that came forward with public, whether it's us or the experts.
We can
So I
certainly
think
give questions. I mean, which
We didn't
questions?
answer it. We didn't answer the other questions.
Right,
You
that-
answer-
Do
So
you
I'm
want
just
to
saying.
answer
You
now?
want to do it now?
Yes. That's
up
what,
to
that's what I
you.
said. Does council have any
Right,
more
I think
comments?
we owe the public an answer.
Okay,
So
go ahead.
those that came up. I don't have any right now, because I would like to probably follow up, because I
Which
wasn't
question
writing
in
notes.
particular, Councilwoman?
Mr. Guy had, 2 questions, and I was trying to follow, but I need clarity on what those questions were, because there were a lot of statements in between, or could someone answer?
They cut them off already?
No.
Oh. Oh.
Well, Mr. Guy's first comment or question was competing with
New
our
Brunswick.
neighboring community. When you're talking about competing, and Tim could explain the real estate values and what you get, the reason why we have $30-40 million worth of investment in 6-7 different projects on Hamilton Street is because we are competing. That's just completely false. He's misunderstanding that no one's going to build a 10-story building in this community. It's not allowed. They are going to build exactly what they're building and what we've gotten. So the idea that we can't compete that's just false. We are. You can go down Hamilton Street. You can see there are 4 new buildings. We have 2 other that are going to be starting this year. We have a big hole in the ground where you could see down at the end of the street where Recon is building. So we are competing, and we're meeting with people on a weekly basis who are assembling properties on the street and are looking to do more development. So that's just not true. The second, I don't remember
was
what
about parking?
Well, the second issue with parking is that would be an absolutely wonderful thing if we had a parking problem on Hamilton Street. There isn't one right now. The Planning Board, the Economic Development Committee, we've been talking about this for years, as Ted will tell you. When we've started looking at that, and we know what some of the solutions will be, if there's a parking problem. If that happens, and honestly, I've been doing this for 25 years, I'd be very surprised if we have a parking problem on that street in the next 20 years. We may have to look at some of the other things, whether it's a public parking or anything like that. I don't see that. If you look in New Brunswick, what are they doing in New Brunswick? They're knocking down the public parking garages because parking is not needed anywhere near to the extent that it was, for all the reasons that Todd pointed out and for a lot of other reasons. And in the future, we expect that need to get lower and lower. He also talked in regard to the different developments, the amount of parking. Every development, as Mike Rossini pointed out, comes in with the amount of parking they think that they need. And we encourage them, as Councilman Chase and the other members, many of you have been on the planning and zoning boards, we encourage them to only give us the parking that you need. Recon, which is the one with the big hole in the ground that they're building right now, has half the amount of parking, I think, or so that are ordinance required, because they proved to the zoning board that that's all they needed because they had experience. And as the other developers come in, none of the boards, neither one of those 2 boards are going to require someone to have 300 parking spaces when they can prove to the board that they need 100. So there is not a parking problem. All the boards, the council, and everyone else has looked at that issue, and we understand that if there becomes an issue, there are different ways to take care of that issue.
If I might add to that, we always said we were not going to change the character of Franklin Township by what it was we were doing. We were certainly going to bring businesses, we were going to bring jobs, We were not going to change the character. What we have done on Hamilton Street does not change the character of Franklin Township. It continues to have the feeling of what it always was, although there will be more prosperity as a result of what has been approved and the vision of where it's going. Having worked in New Brunswick for many years for Johnson & Johnson, you can't compare the downtown of Franklin with the downtown, a well-developed downtown that has concrete and buildings and restaurants and activity, and think that you can turn Hamilton Street in Franklin into something that is similar to what they have developed in New Brunswick. It's a mini city. We still have character that we want to maintain in our community.
And I think to that point, if I may, with the parking, we're not as close to the train station as New Brunswick is, so they're not going to need, there's a walking space to public transportation. I think we've addressed the issue with, if we put in jitney or transportation, and the parking spaces won't be as needed. But it's a comprehensive plan that we have to look at. How do we address the issue and provide some type of transportation if the parking spaces aren't there or people are not driving cars as they have in the past? So I think with that, if we come up with a comprehensive plan and include transportation as part of this conversation and plan moving forward, I think we'd be okay.
And it's in the plan. So, and the other thing to also to consider here is that, and we have discussed this in the Economic Development Committee, is if at some point we identify a need for parking, we have the ability to create municipal parking lots. Generally speaking, in an area such as Hamilton Street, you don't build your parking lots in prime real estate on the street that you're looking to revitalize. You build it behind it. So we would look for areas for pocket parking lots to satisfy a need, if that need arises. But it's anticipated, in all honesty, that need won't arise, that there's sufficient parking either on street or on side street or on off-street parking lots that already exist that are underutilized. So that's really where the whole parking, to kind of wrap it up,
I think
is
it helps
at.
in answering that we've already thought through the process, and that wasn't evident in the presentation or our conversation here with the public, that we have a backup plan should that need arise.
Councilman Chase, thank you.
I just wanted to address parking in, or the M2, the light industrial areas. Very often, what we ask the builder, the developer, to do is to bank some of the parking. In other words, leave space that is not developed as parking, but can be in the future, because one thing we have to bear in mind is that the initial use of a building may change 15 years down the road, and there has to be provision for perhaps a larger amount of parking than is initially needed. Because you just can't park them off into another company's parking lot. We do have a problem of that sort down in Kingston, but if a building, let's say a light industrial use, gets so successful that they have 2 shifts or 3 shifts, and the incoming has to find space while the outgoing shift hasn't quite left yet, suddenly you need a lot more parking. But if we bank the parking in the meantime, we are not putting so much impervious surface down, and yet we retain the flexibility when needed. But yeah, the atrium, I think you can see acres of parking space there, and what I would hope is that with the overall need for less parking, it will mean that actually more can be developed there than is now developed. And incidentally, you spoke about assisted living. We've just had a proposal come in for assisted living at the Quality Inn site on Easton Avenue, which backs up on the atrium area. So it is happening.
Anyone else?
Yeah, just a comment, a couple of comments in
Yes, sir,
response.
Mr. Prasad.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Karazi had mentioned the kids' activities, and one of the things that we've seen with the Human Relations Commission has been that they have been asking for the planning board to think about some kind of a kids' activity in every one of the developments that we think of, because some of the developments that are there, the kids are ending up playing on the streets. And so that was part of what they requested. And they have asked that we consider that in the future, that the kids have some place to go and play. If you're bringing them in to live in 1 or 2 bedroom apartments, they should have some place to play. So that should be considered. And it ties in with any kind of attracting the mothers from out of town, out of the area, to come in and have kids' activities. So that is something that has merit. And Ms. Painson also pointed out that, okay, we're talking about possibly specialty retail or specialty restaurants, or even healthcare workers, as well as you're talking about the biggest demand for warehouse workers. Well, there you need people trained and certified to operate forklifts, etc. So all that training and demand we should be gearing up for also simultaneously to get our people geared up, and that becomes part of the marketing and attraction, that we have people that will be able to do that. So some kind of a training facility for them somewhere should be considered as part of the plan. So those are the comments that I wanted to answer to. I agree with all the parking comments, but you know, New Brunswick always never looked like it was. I remember when I worked there in '77, we used to go out away from the company cafeteria in Johnson Hall for a break, either to Maltese or to Hockey's, which was just open for lunch. And it was all tenements over there, where you have major developments now, but it was Johnson Johnson that had threatened to leave and move, and that's what caused the New Brunswick Development Corporation to be formed, and all that happened. So I've seen the transition, and I know we can do it here on Hamilton Street as just an extension of what's going on there, because they have very limited land over there. So we have a golden opportunity to expand and increase that whole area. So let's keep that in mind. New Brunswick doesn't have a lot of land. We do, and we can redevelop. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'm trying to move this meeting along, but Mr. Wright has said nothing and wishes to speak now, so I certainly will grant him that time.
My question is real small. I like Chanel's, Councilwoman Robinson's idea of that. I have 1,000,001 questions, but I don't have them in the brain right now. But I have some, and I'd rather articulate them now because everyone else would jump in on the game plan. So I'd rather be able to send you 5 or 6 questions for you, give me a quick, synopsis of what's going on. Then I could sit down and actually read it, understand it, and then talk to someone about it. I love what we're doing here, but that's why I'm quiet.
I'm sure he'd love to answer after he gets his retainer.
Carl, procedurally, I think you should send them to Bob or myself, and then we can forward them to Todd. I don't think working directly with him, just procedurally, either one of us would, and we'll get him, and we'll get the answer ASAP for you.
Not a problem. Thank you.
So are we ready to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Be well, Franklin.